The wind owned this land. It came down from the northern peaks with a sound like a grieving woman, scouring the high plains until the very rock was worn smooth and the grass cured yellow before it was ever truly green. This was the Wyoming Territory, 1883, a place that cared little for the ambitions of men and even less for their sorrows. It was a hard country for hard people. Sam Harlan fit the country. He sat his horse, a big roan gelding, on a rise overlooking the shallow basin that held his ranch. The house, the barn, the corrals, all of it looked small, swallowed by the sheer gray and brown emptiness of the land. He was a tall man, wide in the shoulders from a life of work, but quiet. His face was timbered with sun and wind, lines cut deep around his eyes and mouth. He had stopped talking much. 3 years now. There was no one to talk to, save the horse. And horses were better listeners than most men anyway. He was supposed to be mending the drift fence on the North Range, a full-day ride from the ranch house. But he had stopped. His gaze was fixed on a place a mile distant, a sodden scrap wood cabin tucked against the base of a long, crumbling bluff. He had seen it before, dismissed it as a line shack, abandoned. But it was not abandoned. A woman had just stepped out. He watched her. She was thin, her dress a faded calico that hung loose. She was followed by 2 children, a boy of maybe 6 and a girl a year or 2 younger. They were scraps of things, all elbows and knees. Sam Harlan had lost his wife, Mary, and his son, little Tom, 3 winters back, a fever that came on fast and brutal. It had burned through his home, and when it passed, it had taken everything. He had buried them himself, on the hill behind the house, under the lone cottonwood. After that, the man he had been, the one who could laugh and talk and feel the warmth of a hand, he had buried that man too. He lived inside a wall of silence. His world was the pop of a rope, the grunt of a horse, the bawling of cattle, and the constant, screaming wind. His work was his only prayer. He woke in the dark, his breath fogging in the cold room. He pulled on his boots, his hands stiff. He made coffee, thick and black. He fried bacon. He fed his dog, a quiet, one-eyed shepherd named Blue. He saddled the roan. He rode out. He worked until the sun fell. He rode home. He ate, staring into the fire. He slept. It was a life reduced to motion. The motion kept the memories from settling, mostly. Now, he watched this woman, Sarah Miller. Though he did not know her name yet, she was a woman of good spine. He could see that from a mile away. She had lost her husband, Michael, in a mine collapse up by the pass, though Sam did not know this either. All he knew was what he saw: a woman alone, with 2 small children, living in a hovel that a self-respecting badger would reject. She and the children were gathering, not firewood. It looked like they were bent over, picking at the ground near the cabin, digging for roots, maybe. Sago lily bulbs, things that would keep a body from starving but never make it full. Sam shifted in his saddle. The leather creaked. It was not his business. The world was full of widows. The world was full of orphans. It was the way of things. His own grief was a heavy stone in his gut, a cold, familiar companion. He had no room for the grief of others. He had nothing to give them. He had sealed himself off. He did not go to town unless it was for salt or cartridges. He spoke to no one. The few hands he had once employed were long gone. He ran a smaller herd now, just what he and Blue and the roan could manage. It was enough. He saw the boy point up the ridge, towards Sam. The woman stood straight. She did not shade her eyes. She just looked, a long, still moment. Sam was a dark shape on a horse, nothing more, a potential danger, or just another part of the uncaring landscape. She put a hand on the shoulder of each child, a gesture that was both protective and commanding. Then she turned and herded them back inside the soddy. A thin thread of smoke, pale gray, rose from the rusted pipe chimney. It spoke of a mean fire, just enough to fight the morning chill, not enough for real warmth. It spoke of fuel carefully saved. Sam Harlan cursed, a low, rough sound. He turned the roan, nudging it back toward the fence line he was supposed to be fixing. He had work to do. He had his own life, such as it was. This family was not his concern. He worked for 2 hours. He pulled the old, rotten post. He set the new one, tamping the earth around it with the heavy end of his digging bar. The physical effort felt good. It was real. You pushed the earth pushed back. You set a post. It was set. It was not like the fog in his head, the cold emptiness that work was meant to fill. But the image of them would not leave. The thinness of the children, the straight, proud back of the woman, the way they had been digging in the dirt for food. He knew what life was like in these hard places. He knew the town of Junction, 10 miles south. It was a raw, wild place full of men chasing wages or whiskey, and merchants chasing the men, a place where justice was a fickle thing, often decided by the fastest hand or the heaviest purse. There was kindness there, sometimes. The church women, the town doctor, a tired man named Elias Thorne, but mostly it was a place of survival. Everyone for themselves. A widow with 2 children and no means was at the bottom of everything. She would be living on charity, if she was lucky, or on scraps. He remembered seeing her in town months ago. He had been loading sacks of flour into his wagon. She had walked past, holding the hands of her children. She had not looked at anyone. Her face was pale, but her chin was high. He remembered her pride. It had stuck with him, a small burr under his skin. She was not the kind to ask for help. And people in the West, they were strange about help. They would give it freely to a man who was fighting, but they often walked right past a person drowning quietly. He finished the post. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He looked back toward the bluff. He was a fool. He was a broken man. What business did he have interfering? He had built a wall around his life, thick and high. He had kept the world out. More than that, he had kept himself in. He had his horses, his cattle, his dog. They were his companions. They asked nothing of him except food and shelter, and they gave him a simple, honest loyalty. They did not have the power to break his heart. He mounted the roan. He could ride north, finish the fence line. He could ride home, back to his empty, safe house. He turned the roan south, toward the bluff. He rode slow. He did not want to frighten them. As he got closer, the poverty of the place became sharper, more defined. The cabin was built of scavenged lumber and thick squares of prairie sod. The single window was a patchwork of oiled paper and rags. A broken wagon wheel leaned against the wall. There was no barn, no chicken coop, just the small, sad house. He stopped the horse 100 yards out. He waited. The door opened a crack. Then it opened wider. The woman, Sarah Miller, stepped out. She held an old, long-barreled rifle. It was heavy, and it wavered a little in her hands, but she pointed it toward his chest. She was younger than he had thought from a distance, maybe not yet 30. Her hair was a plain brown, pulled back tight. Her face was gaunt, but her eyes, even from this distance, were fierce. The boy, he saw now, was standing just behind her, holding a stick like a club. Sam Harlan raised his right hand, palm out, slow and easy. He kept his left hand on the saddle horn. He did not move. He just sat there, looking at her. He saw the tremor in her hands holding the rifle. It was not just the weight. It was fear. It was exhaustion. He saw the pride that held her up, a force as strong and real as the rock of the bluff behind her. She was protecting her children. She was standing against the wind, against the hunger, against him. He felt something inside his chest, a painful, tight feeling. It was not the familiar ache of his own loss. It was something new, something that felt dangerously like life. He thought of Mary. He thought of Tom. He thought of the 3 years of silence. He looked at this woman, this ghost of a family, and he saw a mirror of his own brokenness. But it was a different kind of break. Theirs was a break that was still raw, still bleeding. His was a scar, old and cold. He sat there for a full minute, the wind pulling at his hat, the silence stretching between them. The woman did not lower the rifle. The boy did not drop his stick. Sam Harlan had come here without a plan. He had just Auto Pro 2 come. He had no words prepared. The words had left him long ago. He looked at her, at the cabin, at the children peeking from behind her skirts. He looked at the empty, hungry land all around them, the land that gave nothing, the land that took everything. He finally opened his mouth. His voice was rough from disuse, a gravelly sound. "I am not here to cause harm," he said. The woman just stared, her knuckles white on the rifle stock. "I saw you, from the ridge," he said, gesturing with his chin. "I am Sam Harlan. I own the Circle H, up north." She said nothing. Her eyes were narrowed, judging him. He saw the children again. The girl was pale, her face smudged with dirt. The boy was trying to look brave, but his bottom lip was trembling. Sam Harlan felt the wall inside him crack. Not a small fissure, a great, painful split. The grief he had kept packed in ice for 3 years began to move. It was an avalanche. He wanted to turn the roan and ride until the horse dropped. He wanted to go back to his empty house and his silent, safe pain. But he looked at the children. He looked at the woman. "He had some supplies," he said, his voice still halting. "In town, flour, bacon." She finally spoke. Her voice was low, but clear, like a small, clean stone. "We do not need charity, Mr. Sam nodded. He had expected that. It was the pride he had seen. "It is not charity," he said. He was lying, but he did not know what else to say. "I need Auto Pro 2. He searched for a reason. "I need sewing done. My shirts, blankets." She looked down at her own frayed dress, then back at him. A small, bitter smile touched her lips for a second. Sewing. He felt like a clumsy giant. He knew nothing of this. He was a man of horses and cattle. He tried again. "Or Auto Pro 2, there is wood to be chopped. At my place, the boy, he is old enough to help. I would pay." The woman looked at her son. A look of such fierce, aching love passed between them that Sam had to look away. "He is 6. She said he is not a hired hand." Sam nodded again. He felt the fool. He had come here, disturbed their day, offered them clumsy insults. He gathered his reins. "I am sorry, ma'am. I meant no disrespect." He began to turn the roan. "Wait," she said. He stopped. She lowered the rifle. "Just a few inches. Why are you here, Mr. Harlan?" Sam looked at her. He could not tell her the truth. He could not say, "Because I am broken, and I see you are broken, and I do not know what to do." He could not say, "Because your children are hungry, and my boy is dead." He said the only true thing he had. "I saw you were digging for roots," he said, his voice flat. "It is a hard winter coming." The woman's face changed. The pride wavered. For a second, he saw the simple, bottomless despair she lived with every day. It was in her eyes. It was the same look he saw in his own shaving mirror sometimes, before he looked away. Then it was gone. The wall was back up. "We manage," she said. Sam Harlan nodded one last time. He looked at the boy. He looked at the girl. He looked at the woman. He turned the roan. He did not spur it. He just let it walk. Slow, back toward the north. He did not look back. He felt her eyes on him, on his back, all the way until he was over the rise. He felt the weight of that rifle, the weight of that pride, and the terrible, crushing weight of those hungry children. He rode back to his fence line, but he did not work. He just sat, staring at the empty land, while the wind howled around him. And for the first time in 3 years, the silence of his life felt loud and wrong and unbearable. Sam Harlan did not ride back to the north fence. He rode home. His work, for the first time in 3 years, felt pointless. The post he had set, the wire he had intended to stretch. It was just busy work. It was a chore he gave himself to fill the hours, to keep his mind from turning inward. from revisiting the small, cold bedroom where his wife and son had breathed their last. He had thought the work was honest. Now it felt like a coward's dodge. He unsaddled the roan, rubbing the horse down with a mechanical, practiced motion. Blue, his one-eyed dog, watched him from the porch, thumping his tail once in greeting. Sam did not speak. He went inside his house. The house was cold. He had not left a fire. He had not expected to be back before dark. He stood in the middle of the main room. It was clean, orderly. Mary had been a tidy woman, and he had kept it that way. Her rocking chair was still by the hearth, the quilt she had been piecing still folded over the back. His son's small wooden soldiers were lined up on the mantel. He had not moved them. He had not moved anything. He was living in a museum of his own grief, a tomb he dutifully swept. He looked at the rocking chair. He looked at the soldiers. He saw the woman, Sarah Miller, standing in her doorway with that old rifle. He saw the children, their faces thin and smudged, their eyes old. He had ridden away. He had seen their pride, and he had respected it. But now, alone in his cold, quiet house, that respect felt like an excuse. Pride did not fill a stomach. Pride did not stop the north wind. He built a fire, his motions angry. He cut thick slices of bacon and threw them in the skillet. He made coffee. He ate standing by the stove, the food tasteless. He was a man with a full larder, a warm house, 1,000 acres of land. He lived in surplus. They were digging for roots. The disconnect was a physical pain. It was a shame that burned in his gut. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the dark, watching the embers of his fire die while the wind hammered the outside of his house. The wind was the only voice. It screamed and moaned, and it sounded, for all the world, like a child crying. He thought of his son, Tom. He thought of the 2 children in that sod hovel. He had no right to his solitude. He had no right to his quiet, orderly grief, not when life, raw and desperate, was being lived just a mile south. He had sealed himself off to avoid pain, but all he had done was make himself useless. 2 days passed. A front moved in, heavy and gray, bringing a cold that was a promise of the winter to come. The air was sharp, stinging the lungs. Sam rode out, telling himself he was checking the herd, pushing them into the canyons where they could find shelter from the wind. But his path took him south. He kept to the ridges, his gaze drawn again and again to the bluff, to the small, sad cabin. He saw them. It was late afternoon, the light already failing, turning the world to shades of gray and iron. They were outside, huddled against the sod wall, trying to catch the last of the day's meager warmth. They were eating. Sam stopped the roan. He was far enough away that they would not see him. Just another dark shape in a darkening world. He squinted. Sarah was holding a tin plate. She had a spoon. She was feeding the little girl. Beth, the boy, Matthew, held his own piece of bread. It was a dark, hard-looking crust. Sarah would take a spoonful of whatever was on the plate, give it to Beth, and then eat a spoonful herself. It looked thin, watery. They were sharing scraps, maybe the last of some potatoes, boiled down to nothing. The wind was vicious. He could see it tear at their thin clothes. Matthew, the boy, was shivering, his whole body shaking so hard he almost dropped his bread. He tried to hold it in both hands, his small shoulders hunched up to his ears. Sarah stopped eating. She put her arm around the boy, pulling him tight against her, rubbing his back with a rough, fierce motion. She spoke to him, her head bent low. Sam Harlan closed his eyes. It was too much. It was a scene from a nightmare. It was the absolute end of things, the point where pride and dignity were being eaten alive by simple, animal cold and hunger. He put his heels to the roan. He was done watching. He was done respecting pride. He would go down there, and he would take them. He would bring them back to his house. He would feed them. He did not care if she pointed the rifle at him. He would take it from her. He would sling the children over his saddle. He would not let this happen. He was halfway down the long slope when he saw another rider. And then 2 more, following. They were coming from the east, from the direction of town. Sam pulled his horse up short, wheeling behind a knot of juniper trees. He watched. The lead rider was a man he recognized, James Wallace. Wallace was not a rancher. He was a presence in town. He owned the Junction House Saloon, the biggest one. He also held interest in the freight company. And it was rumored, the bank. He was a man who dressed in tailored clothes, a black coat and a derby hat. Even out here. He smiled often, but his eyes were cold. He was a man who collected debts. He was a man who owned things and people. The 2 men with him were not smiling. They were hard cases, men who worked for Wallace, who sat in his saloon and quieted things down, or started them, depending on what Wallace needed. Sam's hand went to the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. He just rested it there. He watched. Wallace and his men rode right up to the cabin. They did not slow. They stopped, their horses churning the bare dirt. The cabin door opened. Sarah Miller stepped out. She had the rifle. It came up, steady, aimed at Wallace's chest. James Wallace laughed. It was a smooth, pleasant sound that did not match the cold air at all. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller," he said, touching the brim of his derby. "A harsh day to be entertaining." "State your business, Mr. Wallace, and then leave." Sarah said. Her voice was thin, but it carried, "My business, as you well know, is the note." Wallace said. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "The note signed by your late husband, Michael Bennett, a note for $200, for supplies and equipment leveraged against his claim." "This is not his claim," Sarah said. "This is squatter's land. It was nothing to do with him." "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken," Wallace said, his voice full of false sympathy. "The lien was filed on his equipment and his claim, wherever it might be. The mining company, being disorganized, failed to specify the plot. However, having acquired the note, have taken the liberty of filing the claim marker myself. Right here." He tapped his chest. "This bluff, this patch of dirt, it is all part of the Bennett claim, and now it is part of my claim, as the debt is long past due." Sam's gut tightened. It was a lie, a slick, legal lie that a territorial judge, likely in Wallace's pocket, would uphold. "You are a thief," Sarah said, the rifle unwavering. "I am a businessman," Wallace corrected, "and I am here to collect, or to foreclose." He looked around, his gaze lingering on the pathetic cabin, the rusted chimney, the broken wheel. "Though there is not much here to collect, except perhaps Auto Pro 2. His gaze settled on her. It was not a violent look. It was an appraising look, the look a man gives a horse he is thinking of buying. He looked her up and down, taking in her thinness, the worn dress, the desperate fight in her eyes. "You are a fine-looking woman, Mrs. Miller, despite your circumstances, a waste living out here." Sam Harlan felt a hot, black rage fill his throat. "Get off this land," Sarah said, her voice shaking now, not with cold, but with fury. "I am offering you a choice," Wallace said, ignoring her. "You cannot pay the $200, I know that, but you could Auto Pro 2 work. I need help at the saloon, cleaning, serving." He smiled. "You and your children would have a warm room, 3 meals a day. All you have to do is be Auto Pro 2 accommodating." The word hung in the air, ugly and heavy. "I would rather starve," Sarah whispered. "You are starving," Wallace snapped, his pleasant mask vanishing. "And your children are starving with you. For what? For pride." He spat on the ground. "This is your last offer. You come to town, you work for me, and I forget the debt. You stay here, and you are trespassing. I will not, she said. Wallace sighed, as if bored. Very well. He looked at his two men. The wheel. It's a start. Break it. One of the men, a big man with a dull face, dismounted. He walked toward the broken wagon wheel leaning against the soddy. I am warning you. Sarah cried. I will shoot. She cocked the rifle. The click was sharp. The man paused, looking back at Wallace. Wallace looked at Sarah. He studied the rifle, her stance. He smiled again. I do not think you will. Mrs. Miller, you do not have it in you. And if you did, it would be murder. You would hang. And your children would be sent to an orphanage in Cheyenne. Is that what you want? He nodded to his man. Break it. The man grinned. He put his boot on the wheel and shoved. It fell into the dirt. He raised his heavy boot and stomped down on the dry, brittle spokes. They snapped with a sound like pistol shots. He kicked the pieces apart. Sarah did not shoot. A small, terrible sound came from her throat. The boy, Matthew, ran out from the cabin and threw a rock. It bounced harmlessly off the big man's thick coat. Matthew, no! Sarah screamed. The man turned, his face dark. He took a step toward the boy. Before he could take a second step, a voice cut through the wind. A cold, heavy voice. That is far enough. Sam Harlan had moved the roan out from the junipers. He was sitting in the open, 50 yards away. His Winchester was not in its scabbard. It was lying across his saddle, his hand on the lever. He was not aiming. He did not need to. Wallace and his men froze. They stared at Sam. Harlan, Wallace said, his voice tight. This is not your concern. You are on my range, Wallace, Sam said, his voice flat. My herd grazes this basin. You are disturbing them. This is my property, Wallace said, holding up the paper. A legal claim. I see a woman and her children, Sam said, and I see 3 men, one of them breaking her things. It looks like trouble. I do not like trouble on my range. Wallace stared at Sam. He knew of Harlan. Everyone did. The man who had lost his family, the man who lived like a ghost, the man who had, it was rumored, been a tracker for the army, a dangerous man, best left alone. This is a legal matter. Harlan, a debt. Wallace insisted. I do not see a judge. Sam said, I see a bully. He looked at the man who had broken the wheel. Get on your horse and ride. The man looked at Wallace. Wallace was pale, his lips a thin white line. He had not counted on this. You are making a mistake, Harlan, Wallace said. You are interfering in something you do not understand. I understand this, Sam said. He finally looked at Sarah. She was staring at him, her face a mask of shock, the rifle dangling in her hand. Mrs. Miller and her children are under my protection. If you come back, you will deal with me. Wallace looked at Sam. He looked at his 2 men. They were hired muscle, not gunmen. They had no interest in facing Sam Harlan's rifle. Wallace slowly gathered his reins. He was furious, but he was also a businessman. He knew a bad investment. This is not over, he hissed. He pointed a gloved finger at Sarah. You cannot hide behind him forever. He wheeled his horse around. So sharp the animal reared, he and his men galloped away, back toward the town. Sam Harlan sat his horse until they were gone. The wind was the only sound again. He looked at the broken pieces of the wagon wheel. He looked at Sarah. She had not moved. She looked completely undone. The fight, the pride, the anger, it had all drained away, leaving her hollow. He rode the roan closer. He dismounted, letting the reins drop. The horse stood. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. He took off his hat. He is gone, Sam said quietly. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the broken wheel. He will come back, she whispered. Yes, Sam said. He will come back, And he will auto-pro too. He will auto-pro too. She could not say it. He will have to come through me, Sam said. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were full of a terrible, bleak emptiness. Why? She asked. The same question as before. Why are you doing this? Sam Harlan looked at her, at the two small, terrified children hiding behind her skirts. He thought of his cold, empty house. He thought of the 3 years he had spent hiding from life. He had thought his life was over, but standing here, in the bitter wind, with this broken family and the threat of James Wallace hanging over them, he felt something he had not felt since Mary died. He felt auto-pro too necessary. Ma'am, he said, his voice rough. I cannot answer that. Not in a way that would make sense. He looked at the sky. It would be dark soon, and colder. You cannot stay here tonight, he said. We have nowhere else, she said. Sam Harlan put his hat back on. He had made his decision. The wall was down. He had interfered, and now he had to see it through. Yes, you do, he said. He looked at the cabin, then at her. Get your things. Sarah Miller stood frozen, the man's words echoing in the wind. Get your things. It was not a request. It was a command, as quiet and unyielding as the rock of the bluff itself. Her mind raced. Go with him, a stranger, a man who lived alone, a man with a reputation as a silent, grieving ghost. Pride, sharp and biting, rose in her throat. She was not a charity case. She would not be taken in like a stray dog. I cannot, she said, her voice small but fierce. Sam Harlan looked at her. He did not argue. He simply looked at her, then at Matthew, who was peering from behind her skirts, his small face tight with fear. He looked at Beth, who had started to cough, a dry, racking sound. Then his gaze moved to the broken, scattered pieces of the wagon wheel. Mr. Wallace was not offering a choice. Ma'am, he said, his voice flat. He was stating a fact. He believes this land is his. He will be back, not with papers next time. He will come back for you. The truth of it settled on her, cold and heavy. Wallace's appraising look, his vile suggestion. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Sam Harlan was right. She had held them off with a rifle and pure nerve, but that was gone. Wallace had seen her desperation, and now Harlan had interfered. Wallace's anger would be doubled, aimed at them both. I have nothing auto-pro too. I cannot pay you, she whispered, the last defense of her pride. I am not asking for pay, Sam said. He turned and walked to his horse. He pulled a coiled rope from his saddle. He walked back to the cabin. Without a word, he went inside. She heard him moving. A moment later, he came out carrying their thin, ragged bedding. He tied it into a neat roll. He went back in. He emerged with her cast-iron skillet and the few tin plates they owned. Ma'am, he said, his voice not unkind, but firm. The sun is setting. It is a long walk. She looked at her children. Matthew was shivering. Beth was holding onto her dress, her thumb in her mouth. They were hungry. They were cold. Her pride was a luxury she could not afford. It would not keep them warm. She straightened her back. Matthew, get your coat, and Beth's. She went inside. The cabin was a single, small room, the dirt floor cold under her worn boots. It was a miserable place, but it had been hers, theirs. She grabbed the small cloth sack that held their few extra clothes and the small, carved wooden bird her husband, Michael, had made for her. She took a last look. It was not a home. It was a hole in the ground. When she came out, Sam had tied the bedroll and the sack to the back of his saddle. He walked to her. He looked at Matthew. You are old enough to walk, son. Matthew nodded, trying to look brave. Sam then looked at Beth. He bent down, surprising Sarah with the gentleness in his movement. He was a big man, rough, but his eyes were not. Come on, little one, he said. He held out his hands. Beth, who was shy of all strangers, hesitated for only a second before she let him lift her. He settled her on his hip, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. The sight of it, this large, quiet man holding her daughter, sent a strange, painful ache through Sarah's chest. "Ma'am," he said to her. He gestured to his horse. "You ride." "I can walk," she protested. "The horse is faster. We need to be gone from here." He walked to the roan and put his hand on the saddle. He waited. She knew it was useless to argue. She was exhausted. Her legs felt weak. She let him help her up. He settled Beth in front of her, the child's small body a cold weight against her stomach. He handed her the reins. "Just let him walk," he said. He looked at Matthew. "Stick close to me, son." Sam Harlan put his hand on the horse's bridle, and just like that, they left. Sarah did not look back. She could not. She held her daughter, felt the solid warmth of the horse beneath her, and watched the broad back of the man who was leading them away from the only life they had. The walk to his ranch was silent, save for the wind and the crunch of their boots on the dry land. Sam walked with a long, ground-eating stride, but he kept the pace slow for Matthew, whose small legs had to work hard to keep up. After a mile, without a word, Sam stopped. He lifted Matthew and settled him on his other hip, opposite Beth. He carried both children, one in each arm, and continued walking, leading the horse. Sarah watched him, her heart a confusion of gratitude and fear. He carried her children as if they weighed nothing. He had not complained. He had not asked questions. He had just Autopro 2 acted. It was full dark when they arrived. His ranch house was not large, but it was solid. It was made of thick, squared logs, with a real shingle roof and glass in the windows. A curl of smoke was coming from the chimney. He must have left a fire banked. A one-eyed dog, Blue, came off the porch, wagging his tail, but he did not bark. Sam opened the door. Warmth, real warmth, spilled out. Smelling of wood smoke and coffee, he stood aside. "Go on in. Get the children by the fire." She slid down from the horse, her body stiff. She took Beth from him, and Matthew scrambled down. They ran to the stone hearth, their hands outstretched to the glowing embers. Sarah stood in the middle of the room. It was one large room, like her cabin, but it was clean. There was a solid table, 4 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and shelves with tins of food, sacks of flour and beans. And there was another side to the room, a bed, neatly made, a rocking chair next to it, a quilt folded over the back. On the mantel, a small line of wooden soldiers. This was his home, his and Autopro 2, his wife's. Sam came in, carrying their meager belongings. He set them by the door. He did not look at her. He went to the stove, added wood to the firebox, and put the coffee pot on. "Sit," he said. He sliced bacon from a slab and dropped it into a heavy skillet. The sizzle and smell filled the room. It was a sound of life, of plenty. Beth and Matthew watched the skillet, their eyes wide. He mixed biscuits in a bowl, his hands, which Sarah had only seen hold a rifle or reins, moving with a surprising, practiced skill. He put them in the oven. He did not talk. He just worked. He set 3 plates on the table, the one Sarah recognized from her own bundle, and then 2 more, heavy pottery ones. He poured coffee for himself and for her. He poured milk from a tin for the children. When the biscuits were brown and the bacon crisp, he set it all on the table. "Eat," he said. The children did not wait. They ate with their hands, stuffing the warm, fluffy biscuits into their mouths, grabbing the salty bacon. They ate with a desperate animal hunger that made Sarah's eyes burn. She took a biscuit. It was warm. She took a bite. Her stomach, so used to watery soup and hard roots, clenched, and then Autopro 2 accepted. She ate, slowly, her whole body shaking. Sam ate, too. He sat opposite her, his gaze on his plate. He ate like he did everything else, quietly, efficiently. When the children were done, they were so full and warm they could barely keep their eyes open. They curled up on the rug by the fire, with Sam's dog, Blue, who had settled between them, and were asleep in moments. Sarah looked at them. She looked at the dirty plates. She looked at this strange, silent man. "This is Auto Pro 2. This was your wife's room," she said, gesturing to the bed. "Yes," he said. "I cannot Auto Pro 2. I will not Auto Pro 2 sleep there. I will Auto Pro 2. We will sleep by the fire, with the children." Sam Harlan drank his coffee. He looked at the bed. He looked at her. "It is just a bed, ma'am," he said, his voice low. "The ghosts in this house are mine. They will not harm you. You and the girl take the bed. I will sleep in the barn. Matthew can have my cot." He gestured to a small cot folded in the corner. "I cannot put you out of your own house." "You are not," he said. "The barn is warm. I sleep there often. I like to be near the horses." He stood up. "Good night, Mrs. Miller." He took his coat, his rifle, and he left. The door shut with a solid, final thud. Sarah sat there for a long time. She was safe. She was warm. Her children were full and asleep. She should have been relieved, but she felt utterly, terrifyingly unmoored. She had traded her dangerous, starving freedom for a protection that she did not understand and could not repay. The next days found a strange, halting rhythm. Sarah was up before Sam, stoking the fire, making coffee. She would not be idle. She insisted on working. She mended his clothes, her stitches small and neat. She cooked, taking the supplies he had and stretching them. She swept the floor. She cleaned the house with a fierce energy, trying to scrub away the feeling of charity. Sam let her. He would come in from his work with the cattle, nod a greeting, and wash his hands in the basin. He said little, but she would find a bucket of fresh water by the door every morning. She would find the wood box full. He started to talk, not to her, but to the children. He whittled a small, rough horse for Matthew. He showed him how to oil a saddle. He brought Beth a bright blue jay feather he found on the ridge. Sarah watched him. She saw the deep, settled sadness in him, the same way she saw it in her own reflection. But she saw other things now, a profound patience, a quiet kindness. He was not just the grim, silent man on the horse. He was a man holding onto the world by a thin thread. And yet, he had reached out and pulled her family back from the edge. A respect began to grow between them. They would sit by the fire at night, the children asleep, the wind howling outside. They did not talk of their pasts. They did not talk of Wallace. They talked of the weather, of the cattle, small, safe things. But the silences were no longer empty. They were Auto Pro 2 shared. The peace could not last. Sam knew it. He rode into Junction for supplies. A week after they had come to his ranch, he tied the roan in front of the mercantile. As he came out, a sack of flour on his shoulder. James Wallace stepped out of the saloon, blocking his path. "Harlan," Wallace said, his voice slick. He had his 2 thugs with him. "I heard you took in the widow, playing house at your lonely little ranch." The street went quiet. Men stopped. Sam settled the flour sack in his wagon. He turned. He looked at Wallace. His face was unreadable. "She is under my protection. Wallace, that is all you need to know." "Protection?" Wallace laughed. "Or are you just enjoying Michael Bennett's leavings? I hear she's a fine Auto Pro, too." Sam moved faster than Wallace could see. He did not punch him. He grabbed the front of Wallace's tailored coat, lifting him clear off the boardwalk. He slammed him against a porch post. Wallace's derby hat flew off. "You will not!" Sam hissed, his voice a low, terrible sound. "Speak her name. Ever again!" Wallace's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Sam held him there, a long, breathless second, and then he dropped him. Wallace crumpled to the boardwalk. Sam Harlan turned, stepped into his wagon, and drove away, not looking back. He knew, as he drove, that he had made a fatal mistake. He had not just challenged Wallace. He had humiliated him, publicly. A man like Wallace lived on his reputation for fear. He could not let this stand. The harassment started 2 days later. He found a section of his fence cut, his cattle scattered. It took him a full day to round them up. He found one of his horses, a young filly, lame. A rock had been wedged into her hoof, deliberate and cruel. He started carrying his rifle everywhere. He did not leave the ranch. He taught Sarah to use his shotgun, a heavy 12-gauge. "It is not like your rifle," he explained, his hands on hers, showing her the action. "You do not aim so much as point, but at close range Auto Pro 2, it will stop a man." She was pale, but she nodded. "I understand." She held the weapon, its weight familiar, dreadful. She knew this was not a what if. This was a when. They decided they had to go back to the cabin. Sarah had left a small tin box. Inside were her marriage lines, her husband's last letter. She could not leave them. "It is foolish," she said, her voice full _of shame. "No," Sam said. "It is not." He understood memory. He understood the things you kept. "We will go, all of us. We will go in the wagon. We will be quick." He hitched the team. He put the children in the back. Sarah sat beside him, the shotgun at her feet. Sam had his rifle in his lap. It was a bright, cold day. The ridges were sharp against the blue sky. Sam scanned them constantly. He saw nothing. They reached the bluff. The small cabin looked even more pathetic than before. Sam pulled the wagon up. "Stay here, all of you. Lock the shotgun," he said, but he meant, "Keep it ready." "No," Sarah said. "It is my box. I know where it is." She jumped down before he could stop her. "Matthew, Beth, stay down." She ran inside. Sam stood by the wagon, his rifle in his hands, his eyes moving. The wind, the call of a hawk, and then Auto Pro 2, the crunch of a boot on gravel. "Well, well," a voice said. James Wallace stepped out from behind the cabin. He was not alone. He had 5 men with him, and they had torches. "A family outing," Wallace sneered, his face ugly. He had a bruise on his cheek from the porch post. "You should not have come back, Harlan. And you Auto Pro 2, you should have taken my offer." Sarah ran out of the cabin, the tin box clutched in her hand. She saw them. Her face went white. "Get in the wagon," Sam said, his voice deadly calm. "Stay down." "You are not going anywhere," Wallace said. "You humiliated me. And you Auto Pro 2. He looked at Sarah. "You chose him, a broken-down ghost. Now, you will have nothing." He nodded to his men. "Burn it!" A man with a torch ran forward and tossed it onto the dry sod roof. It smoked, then caught, flames licking up. "That is just the start," Wallace said, pulling his pistol. Sam did not wait. He was not a duelist. He was a soldier. He raised his rifle and fired. The man who had thrown the torch spun, clutching his shoulder. Sam worked the lever, fired again. Another man grunted, diving for cover. The air exploded, gunfire, shouting. Sarah was in the wagon, her arms over her children. She heard a man yelling, coming around the side, trying to get at the horses. She grabbed the shotgun. She did not think. She just pointed. He was a dark shape, coming fast. She pulled both triggers. The roar was deafening. The shotgun kicked, slamming her back into the seat. The man was thrown backward, as if by a giant hand, and did not move. Sam used the blast as cover. He moved, dropping behind the wagon wheel, his rifle a part of him. Lever, aim, fire, lever, aim, fire. He was not angry. He was cold. He was precise. A man ran from cover. Sam's shot took him in the chest. He fell. The fight was over in 30 seconds. 2 men were down, unmoving. The one he had shot in the shoulder was crawling. The other 2, seeing the fight lost, ran for their horses and fled. Wallace stood alone, his pistol in his hand. He had not fired a shot. He was staring, his mouth open, at the carnage, at the man Sarah had shot, at the man Sam had killed. Sam stood up, the rifle steady on Wallace's chest. He walked toward him. "Harlan Auto Pro 2, Wallace stammered, raising his pistol. "Drop it," Sam said. Wallace dropped it. "Get on your horse," Sam said. "Take your wounded man. Leave the dead. You Auto Pro 2, you killed them Auto Pro 2. You brought this," Sam said, his voice like ice. "You brought fire and guns to a woman and her children. Now go. If I ever see you again, I will not stop to talk." Wallace, trembling, scrambled onto his horse. He pulled his wounded man up behind him. He galloped away, not looking back. Silence fell. The only sound was the roar and crackle of the cabin as the roof collapsed, sending a shower of sparks into the cold sky. Sarah was retching over the side of the wagon. The children were screaming. Sam went to the wagon. He put his hand on her back, his hand steady. He waited until the sickness passed. She looked at him, her eyes wide with horror. "The man Auto Pro 2, I Auto Pro 2, I Auto Pro 2. Sam went and looked. The man was dead. His own man was dead. This was no longer about a debt. This was blood. Wallace would not just come back with thugs. He would come back with a rope. He would bring the law, or his own version of it, and claim they were murderers. Sam looked at the burning pyre of her old life. He looked at her face streaked with tears and soot. He looked at the children. He had tried to wall himself off from the world. Now, he had blood on his hands to protect a family that was not his. He had made his choice. "He is gone," Sarah whispered, staring at the dead man. "They are," Sam corrected. He turned to her. The shared silence was gone. This new thing, this violence, was between them now. "We cannot stay here," he said. "Not at the ranch, not anywhere in this territory. He will bring a posse." She just stared at him, the tin box clutched to her chest. He had saved them, and in doing so, he had doomed them all. The ride back to the ranch was a ride through a waking nightmare. The wagon jolted over the dry, rutted ground. Every sound, the creak of the axle, the snort of the horses, the whir of a grasshopper, was amplified, sharp and violent in the stillness that followed the gunshots. Sarah sat on the wagon bench, rigid as stone. Her hands were locked in her lap, clutching the small tin box. Her face was the color of ash. She had not spoken. She had not looked at him. She just stared straight ahead, at the horses' rumps, her eyes wide, seeing nothing, or perhaps seeing too much, seeing the man she had shot. The children were huddled in the wagon bed, buried under a canvas tarp. They were not crying. The terror had frozen them. Matthew held his little sister, his own small face a grim mask, trying to be the man, trying to protect her from a world that had just shown its teeth. Sam Harlan drove. His hands were steady on the reins. His face was granite, but inside, he was a storm. He had brought this. He had taken his private war with his own grief and, by stepping into her life, he had made it public. He had brought Wallace's simmering malice to a boil. He had put a shotgun in a woman's hands and forced her to use it. He had seen the dead, and he had seen her horror. He had thought he was protecting her, but he had only pulled her into the fire. He had lived in his own tomb for 3 years. Now, he had blood on his land. He had death following him, and he had this broken family in his wagon. They reached the ranch. The house, his solid, safe house, looked different. It looked vulnerable. It looked like a target. The dog, Blue, ran out, barking, sensing the wrongness of it all, the smell of gunpowder and fear. Sam stopped the wagon. "We are here," he said. His voice was too loud in the silence. Sarah did not move. "Sarah," he said, gently. She blinked. She looked at him, her eyes vacant. "I Auto Pro 2, I cannot," she whispered. "My hands, they're Auto Pro 2. She looked down at her hands, as if they were covered in blood. They were clean. "Go inside," he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "Take the children. I will unhitch." He helped her down. She stumbled, her legs weak. She gathered the children, pulling them from the wagon bed, and herded them inside, into the warm, safe-smelling house. Sam unhitched the team with quick, angry motions. He rubbed them down, fed them. The familiar work did nothing to quiet his mind. He was a fool. He had thought he could just Auto-Pro to intervene. He had thought he could stand as a wall. But the world did not work that way. The world was full of men like Wallace, and to fight them, you had to become a man like Auto-Pro too well, like Sam Harlan. And he had just shown Sarah and her children what that meant. He went inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. The children were sitting on the rug by the fire, not playing, just sitting, shoulder to shoulder, staring into the flames. Sarah was at the stove. She was moving, but it was a mechanical, broken movement. She was trying to make food. The sun was setting. They had not eaten since morning. She was acting out the motions of life. He watched her. She picked up the flour sack. Her hands were shaking so violently that a cascade of white flour spilled across the floor. "Damn it," she whispered, a sound of utter despair. She dropped to her knees, trying to scoop the flour back up with her trembling hands, mixing it with the dirt from the floor. Sam moved to help her. "Leave it. It is just flour." She flinched as he approached. A sharp, animal movement. She scrambled back, away from him, her hand to her mouth. "Do not," she whispered. "Just Auto-Pro 2, do not." He stopped, his hand outstretched. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of everything, afraid of his touch, afraid of the world, afraid of the memory that was screaming in her head. He backed away. He stood by the door, helpless, as he watched her. He had never felt so useless. He could face down gunmen. He could kill, but he did not know how to fix this. She got to her feet. She tried again. She sliced bacon, the knife clattering against the skillet. She mixed a new batch of biscuits, her motions jerky. She put them in the stove. They sat at the table. The children came, drawn by the habit of mealtime. Sam put them in their chairs. Sarah put the food on the table. It was a disaster. The bacon was burned black on one side, raw on the other. The biscuits were charred on the outside, doughy in the middle. It was a meal of scraps, a burned, broken offering. They sat in the silence, staring at the ruined food. This was what their lives had become. The remnants, the scraps, the burned pieces. Matthew, the little boy, looked at the food. He looked at his mother, and he began to cry. It was not a loud, childish wail. It was a silent, heartbreaking weeping. His whole small body shook. That sound broke her. Sarah dropped her fork. It clattered onto the tin plate. She put her face in her hands, and she shattered. There were no tears, not at first, just a dry, rasping sound, as if she were strangling. Her shoulders heaved. She was back at the cabin, the shotgun roaring, the man falling. She was back in the mine, her husband's body being carried out. She was back at every moment of loss, every moment of fear, and it was all, finally, too much. Sam Harlan looked at her, this strong, proud woman, now completely undone. He looked at the crying boy and the terrified girl. He looked at the burned scraps of food on the table. This was the moment. This was the bottom. He had thought, 3 years ago, that he was at the bottom, but his had been a clean grief, a solitary one. This was a shared, violent ruin. He stood up. He walked around the table. He took her plate, with the burned scraps, and set it aside. He then went and knelt in front of her. He did not touch her. He just knelt, waiting, until the terrible, dry sobs began to quiet. She finally lowered her hands. Her face was ravaged, her eyes swollen and empty. "I cannot," she whispered. "Sam, I cannot. I Auto-Pro 2. I took a life. I am Auto-Pro 2. I am what he said Auto Pro 2. No, Sam said, his voice low and fierce. You are not. You are a mother. You protected your children. You did what I forced you to do. This blood Auto Pro 2, it is mine, not yours. He stood up. He looked at the rifle he had leaned by the door. He will come back. He will not come alone. He will have the sheriff from Cheyenne, or a marshal. He will twist this. He will call it murder. Sarah's head snapped up, a new terror in her eyes. The law. They will Auto Pro 2. They will take me. What will happen to my children? I will not let that happen, Sam said. We must go, she said, scrambling to her feet, her voice frantic. I must take them. We must hide Auto Pro 2. Where? Sarah, he said, and the use of her name, so raw and direct, stopped her. Back to digging roots, back to some other town, in some other hovel, waiting for another James Wallace? There is no hiding, not for you, not alone. She stared at him, her last bit of hope dying. Then what is left? Sam looked at her, and in that moment, the last wall around his own heart crumbled. The last ghost in his house faded. He saw, not the widow he had rescued, but the woman he could not live without. He saw the children, not as orphans, but as the only future that mattered. The ranch, the land, the graves on the hill Auto Pro. To it was the past. It was an anchor, and he had to cut the rope. When I brought you here, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he had not felt in years, I was offering shelter. I was just Auto Pro to a man with an empty house. It was not enough. I brought you into my war. You saved us, she whispered. No, we saved each other, he said, and now we have to finish it. He stepped toward her. He did not kneel. He stood before her, as an equal. He took her hands. They were cold. He held them, warming them in his own. Get your things, he said. She looked up at him, her brows furrowed in a confusion of grief and fear. What Auto Pro 2? What do you mean, my box Auto Pro 2? Everything, he said, his voice full of a new, certain power. Pack the food, all of it, the good blankets, your clothes, the children's clothes. Everything we can fit in the wagon? We are leaving. Tonight. Her eyes widened. Leaving Auto Pro 2 here, your ranch, your Auto Pro 2, your wife's grave? He nodded. The words were the hardest he had ever spoken. Mary is gone. Tom is gone. I have been Auto Pro 2. I have been a caretaker, a ghost. I have been living on the scraps of my own life. This place, Auto Pro 2, it is not home. It is a stone. It will sink us all. He squeezed her hands. You, and Matthew, and Beth, you are life. You are the first life that has been in this house in 3 years. I will not let Wallace take that. I will not let him twist what you did. We will not wait for him. He saw the question in her eyes, the terrifying, hopeful, we. You Auto Pro 2, you are coming, she whispered. You would Auto Pro 2 leave all this. Sam Harlan looked at her, at this woman who had survived starvation, threats, and violence, and who was still standing. He saw her strength, even now, buried under the shock, and he felt a love so profound, so real, it burned away the last of his grief. I am not sending you, Sarah, he said, his voice soft. I am taking you. This ranch is not home. My life here was not a life. It was a waiting. I am done waiting. He let go of one of her hands and touched her cheek, his rough fingers gentle. Get your things, he said again. You are coming home. Home, she asked, a tear finally spilling, a tear of confusion, not of sorrow. Yes, he said, with me. I do not know where. Oregon, maybe the high valleys in California. Somewhere new, somewhere clean. We will drive until we find a place that feels right. And that Auto Pro 2 that will be home. You, me, the children. That is home. He looked at her, waiting. He had laid his entire broken, healing heart at her feet. Sarah looked at him. She saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the promise. It was not just protection. It was Auto Pro 2 everything. It was a new life, offered by a man who was as broken and as strong as she was. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. Then she nodded again, and a small, watery light came back into her eyes. "All right," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "All right, Sam." "Good," he said. He gave her hand one last, firm squeeze. "There is no time to waste. We leave before the moon sets. We need a long start." He turned. All business now. A man with a purpose. He went to the children, who had been watching, silent. "Matthew, Beth, you are going on a trip. A long one. I need you to be brave. I need you to help your mother pack. Can you do that?" Matthew, his eyes still red, looked at Sam. He saw the strength. He saw the promise. He stood up a little taller. "Yes, sir," he said. Sam Harlan nodded, a small smile touching his lips for the first time in 3 years. He turned to Sarah. Their eyes met. The thing was done. The promise was made. "Get your things," he said. And this time, it was not a command. It was a vow. The house, once a silent tomb, was now a hive of frantic, whispered activity. The decision was made. The act of packing was a final, severing motion. Sarah, her hands still shaking but now driven by a new, desperate purpose, moved with a speed she did not know she possessed. She tore the good blankets from the bed where she had slept in a strange, chaste safety. She packed the remaining bacon, the rest of the flour, the coffee, the tinned milk. Every item Sam pointed to, she packed. These were not supplies for a week. This was for a life. Sam worked outside, in the cold, thin moonlight. He hitched his best team, a pair of strong, broad-backed mules, to the heavy freight wagon. He left the lighter buckboard. The mules would last longer. They were built for the long haul. He loaded barrels of water, a sack of oats. He checked the axles, the tongue, the heavy wheels. His motions were fluid, economical. He was no longer a rancher. He was a man preparing for a long march. He went into the barn. He looked at his other horses, the roan gelding that had carried him for years. He could not take them all. He saddled the roan and tied its lead to the back of the wagon. He would need a riding horse. The Rest Auto Pro 2, he opened the corral gate. He slapped the rumps of the remaining horses. "Go on, get!" They scattered, confused, then trotted out into the basin. Free. It was a painful, necessary sacrifice. He went back inside. Sarah had the children dressed in every layer they owned. Matthew, his face pale but set, was holding a small bundle of his own things, the whittled horse Sam had given him. Beth was asleep on her feet, leaning against her mother. "It is time," Sam said. He took the last 2 things, his rifle and the heavy box of cartridges. He handed Sarah the shotgun. "Keep this by you, and this." He gave her his pistol, a heavy Colt, and a handful of rounds. "You know how to load it?" "Yes," she said, her voice thin. "Good." He banked the fire, a reflex he could not stop. He looked around the room. The rocking chair, the small wooden soldiers on the mantel. He paused. He reached up and swept the soldiers into his coat pocket. For Matthew, he told himself, but it was for him. It was the last piece of his old life he would take. "Sam," Sarah whispered from the doorway. He turned. He blew out the lamp. The house plunged into darkness, lit only by the pale rectangle of the open door. He walked out, pulling the door shut behind him. He did not lock it. There was nothing left to protect. He helped Sarah onto the high wagon seat, settling Beth in her lap. He lifted Matthew into the wagon bed, tucking him in with the sacks of flour and bedding. "Stay down, son. No matter what you hear, you stay down and you hold on to your sister if she comes back." "Yes, sir," the small, muffled voice replied. Sam climbed up, taking the reins. He looked back. Just once, the ranch sat dark and silent, a husk. He looked up at the hill, toward the lone cottonwood tree. He could not see the graves. "Goodbye, Mary," he whispered. "Goodbye, Tom." He clicked his tongue. The mules leaned into their collars. The heavy wagon groaned, and they moved, rolling away from the only home he had known, into the vast, dangerous dark. They traveled north first, away from town, away from the pass. Sam was taking them up into the high, broken country, intending to cut west over a series of game trails he knew, a path that would be hard on the wagon but would keep them hidden. Wallace would expect them to take the main road south. This was a gamble. For hours, the only sound was the creak of the wagon and the clop of the mules. The moon set, and the world became a black, rolling sea. Sam drove by instinct, by the feel of the land under the wheels, his eyes scanning the black ridge line. Sarah sat beside him, the shotgun across her lap. The shock had burned off, leaving a cold, hard resolve. She had killed a man, and she would kill again to protect her children. She looked at the man beside her. His profile was a hard cut against the stars. He had given up everything for them, his grief, his home, his past, her heart, which she had thought was dead and buried with her Michael, felt a painful, powerful pull toward him. It was not just gratitude. It was a kinship, a bond forged in blood and fear. Dawn came, not as a comfort, but as a threat. The darkness had been their cover. The light made them a target. The sky turned a pale, sickly gray, and the land resolved itself into sharp, cold shapes of rock and sage. They were in a shallow wash, the wagon wheels grinding in the sand. Sam stopped the team. He was listening. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. He did not answer. He just held up a hand. The wind, the call of a bird, and then Auto Pro 2, the distant, unmistakable sound of shod horses on rock. Not one, many. "He did not go south," Sam said, his voice flat. "He knew." Sarah's blood ran cold. "How many?" "Too many," Sam said. He looked around, his eyes desperate, scanning the terrain. The wash was a trap. The walls were low. There was no cover. "Damn it, he cut us off." He looked ahead. The wash bent to the left. "Maybe Auto Pro 2, Sarah. When I tell you, you take these reins. You drive these mules as hard as they will go. Do not stop. Do not look back. Just drive. Do you understand?" "And you," she said, her throat tight. "I am going to buy you time." He grabbed his rifle. "No," she said, her hand grabbing his arm. "No, Sam, we go together. Or we Auto Pro 2. "That is not a choice," he said, his voice hard. "You get those children out. That is the only thing that matters." Before he could jump down, they came. They appeared on the low ridge to their left. Not a quarter-mile off, 7 riders. James Wallace was at their head, on a big black horse. He was not wearing his derby hat. He had a gun belt strapped on. He looked like a different man, a hunter. "There they are," Wallace roared. His voice carried on the cold morning air. "Ha!" Sam yelled. Slapping the reins, the mules lunged, the wagon lurching forward. A shot rang out. A bullet whined past Sam's head. "Drive!" Sam yelled, shoving the reins into Sarah's hands. He scrambled over the seat, into the back of the wagon with Matthew. "Get down!" he yelled at Sarah. "Keep your head down and drive." "Matthew, get under the sacks," he commanded. He ripped the canvas tarp off the supplies. He was not running. He was fighting. The wagon careened, rocks and sand flying from the wheels. Sarah, her face white, her teeth gritted, held the reins, whipping the mules with the ends. The riders were coming, fanning out, whooping. Sam rested his rifle on the tailgate. He was a rock in the jolting, swaying wagon. He took a breath. He let it out. He picked the lead rider, not Wallace, but the man fastest on his flank. He let him. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The man's horse stumbled, somersaulting, throwing the rider. "One," Sam said, working the lever. The other riders slowed, spreading out, taking cover. They were not fools. They were shooting now, their bullets thudding into the heavy wooden sides of the wagon. "Faster! Sarah!" Sam yelled. "They are coming from the right," she screamed. Sam swung around. 2 men were trying to get ahead, to cut them off at the bend. He fired. He missed. The wagon jolts were too much. He fired again. He hit a horse. It went down. "Get out!" the rider yelled, jumping clear. But Wallace was smart. He was holding back, letting his men test the defenses. They came to the bend. The wash deepened. The walls rose to 10 feet. It was a canyon, a choke point. "Stop!" Sam yelled. "Stop the wagon, Wedget!" Sarah, not questioning, pulled the mules hard to the left, running the side of the wagon against the canyon wall. They were blocked. They could not go forward, and the riders were right behind them. "This is it," Sam said. He looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she was holding the shotgun. "In the wagon. With the children. Lay flat. Do not lift your head. And if any of them get past me Auto Pro 2, use it." Sam Auto Pro 2. "Do it," he roared. She scrambled into the back, pulling Beth with her, shoving them both under the supplies, next to Matthew. Sam jumped to the ground. He untied the roan, slapping its rump. "Get!" The horse, panicked, galloped down the canyon, away from the fight. It was a distraction. Sam Harlan took his stand behind the heavy rear wheel of the wagon. He set his rifle on the wagon bed. He had his pistol. He checked his cartridges. He was 1 man. They were 5. They came, walking their horses now, cautious. "Harlan," Wallace's voice echoed in the narrow space. "It is over. I have 5 men. You are alone. Throw out your guns. Send out the woman. And I will Auto Pro 2. I will make this quick for you." Sam said nothing. He waited. He could see them, just 50 yards back. They were spreading out. Last chance. Harlan. Sam saw a man peek from behind a rock. He fired. The ricochet screamed. The man ducked back. "All right," Wallace yelled. "Fire, all of you! Light him up!" The world exploded. Bullets slammed into the wagon, tearing splinters from the wood. The air was full of smoke and the deafening roar of gunfire. Sam was pressed against the wheel, the wood protecting him. He heard a child scream, muffled. The firing stopped. "You alive in there?" "Harlan!" Wallace laughed. Sam waited. One of the men, impatient, spurred his horse forward, firing his pistol. Sam stepped out, smooth and fast. He fired the rifle. The man was blasted out of his saddle. "2," Sam whispered. "Damn you," another man yelled, rising from cover, firing his own rifle. Sam felt a white-hot poker slam into his left shoulder. The force spun him around, knocking him against the wagon. He dropped his rifle. "He is hit!" someone yelled. "He is hit!" "Sam!" Sarah screamed from inside the wagon. "Stay down," Sam bellowed, his voice choked with pain. He drew his pistol with his right hand. His left arm was useless, blood already soaking his shirt. They came now. They were not cautious. They smelled blood. 2 men, running on foot, firing as they came. Sam leaned against the wheel. He aimed. Fire! The first man stumbled, clutched his gut, and fell. Fire! The second man stopped, looked at his chest in surprise, and pitched forward. 4. He was breathing hard, his vision graying at the edges. There was only one left. James Wallace. Wallace was still on his horse, at the mouth of the small canyon. He had watched his men die. His face was a mask of pure, reptilian hatred. "You Auto Pro 2, you animal," Wallace hissed. He raised his pistol. Sam tried to raise his arm was too heavy. The pain was a black ocean. Click! Wallace's pistol. It was empty. He had fired all his rounds into the wagon. He stared at the gun in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief. Sam smiled, a bloody, grim smile. He pushed himself off the wheel. He started to walk toward Wallace. He was unsteady, but he was moving. Wallace, in a panic, threw his empty pistol at Sam. He reined his horse around, spurring it. "No," Sam said. He raised his right arm, the heavy Colt seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds. He held it with both hands, his left arm sending screams of agony up his neck. He centered the sight on Wallace's back. He did not want to kill him this way, but he had to. For Sarah, for the children, for the future. He took a breath. "Sam, no!" Sarah screamed. She was standing up in the wagon. Sam faltered. He looked at her. In that second, Wallace was gone. Galloping away, over the ridge, he had run. Sam Harlan stood in the silence of the canyon. 4 men were dead or dying on the sandy floor. His wagon was riddled with bullets. His shoulder was on fire. He looked at Sarah. She was looking at the dead men, her hand to her mouth, her face pale with the sickness of it. Then she looked at him, at the blood pouring down his arm, at his pale, sweat-soaked face. "Sam." She jumped from the wagon, running to him. He met her, taking 3 steps. Before his legs gave out, he fell to his knees. She caught him, her small body straining under his weight. "You are hit," she whispered, her hands fluttering over the wound. "It is Auto Pro 2, just a scratch." He lied, his teeth gritted against the wave of blackness. "Matthew," Sarah yelled, her voice frantic. "Bring me the water and the Auto Pro, to the cloth from the bundle. Hurry!" Sam leaned against her. The fight was over. Wallace was gone. He had run. He had left his men. He was a coward. He would not be back. Sam looked at the men he had killed. He felt nothing. Not triumph, not regret, just a vast, hollow emptiness. "It is done, Sarah," he whispered, his head falling against her shoulder. "It is done." "Hush," she said, her voice breaking. She was pressing a piece of her own petticoat against the bleeding hole. "Hush, Sam. You are all right. We are all right. I have you. I have you." He felt her arms around him, holding him. He smelled the smoke, the fear, and the simple, clean scent of her. He had fought for justice, for a new life, and he had won. But sitting in the dirt of a dry wash, bleeding, with 4 dead men around him, it did not feel like winning. It just felt finished. He let his head rest. He closed his eyes. The canyon was silent. The echo of the last gunshot had faded, leaving only the sound of the wind, the heavy, panicked breathing of the mules, and Sam's ragged gasps. Sarah held him, her hands sticky with his blood, her own body shaking in the aftermath of terror. The world had narrowed to this one patch of dirt. The dead men sprawled like broken dolls, and the living man in her arms. "Matthew!" she screamed again, her voice cracking. "The water! Matthew!" The boy, his face a small, white smudge, scrambled from the wagon. He was clutching the water skin. He ran to them, his boots slipping in the sand, and knelt beside his mother, his eyes wide with a horror no child should ever see. "It is Auto Pro 2, all right, son," Sam grunted, his eyes squeezed shut against the pain. "You are Auto Pro 2 safe." "Hush, Sam," Sarah commanded. Her voice was sharp, cutting through her own fear. The shock was receding, replaced by a fierce, cold clarity. He was alive. She had to keep him that way. "Press here," she told Matthew, guiding his small hands to the cloth she had wadded against Sam's back, where the bullet had exited. "Press hard. Do not look." She tore a long, clean strip from her petticoat. She unbuttoned Sam's bloody shirt, her hands clumsy but determined. The wound in his shoulder was a raw, dark hole, bleeding sluggishly. It was high, missing the lung. He was lucky. They were all lucky. "This will hurt," she said, her voice low. "I know," he breathed. She poured water from the skin over the wound, washing away the blood and grit. Sam's entire body went rigid. A low groan forced from his chest. She then folded the cloth into a thick pad and pressed it firmly into the wound. "Hold this," she said to Matthew. Moving his hands to the front, she took the strip of cloth and began to wrap it tight around his shoulder and chest, binding the pads in place. It was a clumsy, desperate piece of work, but the bleeding slowed. Sam's head lolled against her, his skin clammy. "We Auto-Pro 2 have to Auto-Pro 2, he whispered. "We will," she said. "Just Auto-Pro 2, be still. Let me think." She looked around, the dead, the bullet-scarred wagon. The sun was climbing, the day's warmth mocking the coldness in the canyon. Wallace was gone. But for how long he was a coward. But he was also a man of influence. He would get to town, to the nearest telegraph. He would not say he was ambushed. He would say he was ambushed. He would paint Sam as a killer, a kidnapper. He would come back, and he would come with the law. "We have to go," she said, echoing his words. "Now, we have to get him into the wagon." Sam tried to push himself up. "I can Auto-Pro 2 walk." He failed. His right arm, his good arm, trembled, and he fell back against her. "No, you cannot," she said. "Matthew, we have to lift him." She was a thin woman. Matthew was a small boy. Sam was a heavy man. It looked impossible. "Sam," she said, looking him in the eye, "you must help us. I cannot lift you. You must use your legs." He nodded, his face pale, his jaw set. "All right." She and Matthew got under his arms, Sarah taking the wounded side, careful not to put pressure on it. "Now, Sam, on 3. 1, 2, 3. He roared, a sound of pure agony and effort. He pushed with his legs. They strained, half lifting, half dragging him. They got him to the wagon. The wagon bed was high. "Beth," Sarah yelled. "In the wagon, you have to grab his coat pole." The little girl, her face streaked with tears, crawled to the tailgate. She grabbed a fistful of his bloody coat. "Again, Sam," Sarah cried. With a final, desperate lurch, they heaved him over the side. He collapsed into the wagon bed, among the sacks of flour, his eyes rolling back. For a terrible second, she thought he was dead. Then he groaned. That Auto-Pro 2 was not Auto-Pro 2 graceful. Relief, sharp and dizzying, washed over her. She scrambled into the wagon bed beside him, arranging the bedding under his head, covering him with a blanket. "Matthew, get the rifle, the pistol, all of them," she commanded. The boy, his face grim, nodded. He ran and collected the weapons, the heavy reality of what they had done. He brought them to the wagon. Sarah climbed onto the driver's seat. She looked at the bodies. She had killed one of them. The thought made her stomach clench. A cold, hard knot. There was no time for guilt. There was no time for burial. There was only time to run. She took the reins in her hands. She had driven a buckboard, but never a heavy freight wagon, never a team of mules. "Get up!" she cried, her voice thin. She snapped the reins. The mules, spooked by the gunfire, jerked. The wagon wheels spun, then caught. They lurched forward, clear of the rocks, and began to move, faster and faster. Down the wash. Sarah held on, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed forward. She did not look back. The journey was a blur of dust and fear. She drove them west, into the uncharted, broken lands. Sam had told her the rough direction. West, always west. Away from the territory. Away from the telegraph lines. Away from the law. For 3 days, Sam was lost to them. He burned with fever. He thrashed in the back of the wagon, his voice thick and rough, calling out. He called for Mary. He called for Tom. He would surface, his eyes wild, and stare at her. "Got to Auto-Pro 2, fix the fence," he would murmur. "The wind Auto-Pro 2, it is too cold for the boy." Sarah would stop the wagon, her heart aching. She would bathe his face with their precious water. "It is all right, Sam," she would whisper. It is Sarah. The boy is fine. He is warm." He would look at her, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Sarah, I am here, Sam." "You are safe." "We are safe?" Then the fever would take him again, and he would fall back, lost in his own past. She cared for him as she had cared for her own children through sickness. She cleaned the wound, her stomach turning at the smell, but her hands steady. She forced water between his cracked lips. She sat beside him through the night, the shotgun across her lap, while her children slept curled at her feet. She would watch his face in the moonlight. This stranger who had given up everything. She saw the lines of grief, the hardness, but she also saw the deep, profound goodness that he had tried to bury. Her heart, so long frozen with her own grief for Michael, began to thaw. It was not a betrayal. It was Autopro 2, a continuation, a new life, rising from the ashes of the old. On the fourth day, they were in the high mountains. The air was thin and cold, the land green and alive with pine. They crossed a high pass, and the land fell away before them, a vast, wide valley that stretched to the horizon. It was a new world. She stopped the wagon on the crest. The children, who had been silent for days, let out a small cheer. "Mama, look," Matthew said, pointing. "A river." A silver ribbon of water wound through the valley floor. Sarah looked back into the wagon. Sam was staring at her. His eyes were clear. The fever was gone. "You Autopro 2 did it," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears she had refused to shed. "We did it." "Where Autopro 2 are we?" "I do not know," she said, with a small laugh that was half a sob. "West, just west." He looked out at the valley. "It is Autopro 2 good," he said. They camped by that river for a tweak. It was the first time they had stopped. The first time they were not running. Sam was weak, but he was alive. He sat propped against a wagon wheel, his arm in a sling Sarah had fashioned. He watched her. He watched her teach Matthew how to fish, using a line and hook from Sam's small supply box. He watched her sing to Beth, a soft, low lullaby, as she brushed the child's tangled hair. He watched her move, her worn dress, her thin frame, but she was not the gaunt, desperate woman he had first seen digging for roots. She was strong. She was vital. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had saved him, not just from the bullet, but from the empty, silent life he had been living. She had driven them, protected them, healed him. She came and sat beside him, handing him a tin cup of hot coffee. The children were asleep, curled up by the fire. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the rush of the river and the pop of the fire. "Wallace Autopro 2, he said finally. "He is gone. Sam," she said. "He is back there. This is Autopro 2 somewhere else." "He will not stop." "It does not matter," she said, looking at him, her gaze direct. "He cannot find us. And if he did Autopro 2, we would face him, together." He looked at her, at the strength in her face. "You Autopro 2. You were not afraid. In the canyon, I heard you." She looked down at her hands, the hands that had held a shotgun, that had cleaned his wound. "I was terrified," she whispered. "I have never been so afraid. But Autopro 2, I was not alone. When I was in that cabin, before you Autopro 2, I was alone. And that Autopro 2, that is a different kind of fear. That is a fear that eats you. This Autopro 2, this was just Autopro 2, a fight." He reached out with his good hand, his right hand, and touched her. Not her arm, not her shoulder. He laid his hand over hers, where it rested on her knee. His rough, calloused palm covered her smaller, chapped one. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. "I told you," he said, "that I was taking you home. I Autopro 2, I did not know what I was saying. I just Autopro 2, I just knew I could not let you go." I know, she said, her voice soft. But now Auto Pro 2, I look at this valley. I look at you, and Matthew, and Beth. And Auto Pro 2, I do not think I have ever been home. Not really, not until now. She looked at their joined hands. Michael Auto Pro 2, my husband Auto Pro 2, I loved him. I Auto Pro 2, I thought that was the only love I would ever have. I thought my heart was buried with him. I know, Sam said, his own heart aching with the memory of his own graves on the hill. But it is not, she said, looking up at him, her eyes clear in the firelight. It is Auto Pro 2, just Auto Pro 2 changed. It is bigger. You, Sam Auto Pro 2, you made room for us. In your life, in your grief, and now, Auto Pro 2. Now, he said, there is no more grief. It is just Auto Pro 2 room. He leaned in, slow, giving her time to pull away. She did not. She met him halfway. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, not of fire. It was a kiss of quiet, profound gratitude. It was a kiss of promise. It was the soft, certain touch of two broken, lonely people, finally finding their way home. He pulled back, his hand still holding hers. Oregon, he said. I hear the valleys are green all year. A man can build a house, a real house, with a floor. And Auto Pro 2. And a porch, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. For a rocking chair. Yes, he said, his own smile, rusty from disuse, finally appearing. A rocking chair. For you. And a barn, Matthew's small voice piped up from the bedding. For the mules. And Auto Pro 2 a new horse. Sarah and Sam looked startled, then laughed. A real shared laugh. Yes, son, Sam said, his hand tightening on Sarah's. A barn and a new horse. He looked at Sarah, his partner, his equal. The long, hard road was behind them. The future was here, in this valley, by this river, with this new, patched together and unbreakable family. It was a start. The high valley was a sanctuary. For 10 days, they rested by the river, and the world began to heal. The river itself, cold and clear, seemed to wash away the blood and the grit of the high desert. The mules grew fat on the thick green grass. The children, Beth and Matthew, lost the pinched, haunted look in their eyes. They chased butterflies. They brought Sarah bouquets of purple and yellow wildflowers. They were children. Sam healed, too. The bullet had torn through the heavy muscle of his shoulder. Missing bone, missing anything vital. It was a wound of fire and flesh. Sarah, who had seen her share of hardship, proved to be a natural healer. She kept the wound clean, using boiled river water and the last of her clean cloth. She made a poultice from willow bark, a trick she had learned from her mother. The fever, which had raged in him for 3 days, broke, leaving him weak, but clear-headed. He spent those 10 days watching. He was a man who had only ever known how to do. He fixed, he built, he rode, he fought. Now, with his left arm bound tight to his chest, he could do nothing. He sat propped against the wagon wheel, and he watched Sarah. He watched her create a home out of nothing. She made a fire pit from river stones. She cooked, her hands sure and steady. She washed their clothes in the river, pounding them clean against a flat rock. She mended. She organized. She planned. She did not just survive. She built. She was the architect of their new life. And he was, for the first time, her dependent. It changed him. The silence that had once been his armor felt, now, like an absence. He found himself speaking, not about the past, not about the ranch, but about small things. The mules Auto Pro 2, they favor that clover, he said one afternoon, his voice still rough. Sarah looked up from the fish she was cleaning, a line of silver trout Matthew had caught. They have earned it, she said. That boy, Sam said, nodding at Matthew, who was skipping stones on the water. He's Auto Pro 2, he is a good boy, strong. He had a good teacher, Sarah said quietly. looking at Sam. A comfortable, warm silence settled between them. It was not the cold, empty silence of his old life. It was a shared quiet, full of things understood. On the 11th day, Sam stood. He was unsteady, but he was on his feet. His arm ached, a dull, deep throb, but his head was clear. "It is time," he said. She nodded. "I know." She had already packed. They loaded the wagon, but it was not the frantic, desperate flight from the ranch. It was a careful, hopeful act. Sam, with his one good arm, could only direct. Sarah and Matthew did the heavy work, lifting the sacks, securing the barrels. They worked as a team. They followed the river down out of the high mountains, into a valley that unfolded before them like a map of paradise. The grass was waist-high. Stands of oak and sycamore offered deep, cool shade. The air did not smell of dust and alkali. It smelled of damp earth, of pine, and of the distant, salt tang of the sea. This was Oregon. They found a town after another 2 weeks of travel. It was not a town, really. Just a crossroads, a mercantile, a blacksmith, a land office, and a single, unpainted church. It was called Willamette Crossing. Sam pulled the mules to a halt in front of the mercantile. People looked at them. They saw a battered freight wagon, a team of weary mules, a man with his arm in a sling, and a woman with 2 small children. They looked like any other settlers, beaten but not broken, arriving to find a new life. No one saw a killer. No one saw a ghost. Sam walked into the land office, Sarah at his side. He laid his money on the counter, the coins he had carried from his old life. "I am here to file a claim," he said. They found their land 20 miles upriver. It was a wide, flat bench of land, protected on one side by a high, wooded bluff, and on the other, by a bend in the river. It was green. It was quiet. It was theirs. The first thing they built was not a house. It was a fire, a permanent one. Sarah and the children gathered stones, and Sam, with his good arm, set them. It was their center. Then came the house. It was a slow, agonizing, and beautiful process. Sam, a man of profound physical competence, was now clumsy. He could not lift the heavy logs. He could not swing the axe with one arm. He sat on a stump, his frustration a visible thing, as he tried to teach Sarah how to notch a log. "No," he would say, his voice tight. "The Cut Auto Pro 2, it has to be deeper, on the bottom." "I am trying, Sam," she said, her own voice strained, sweat and sawdust on her face. He saw her frustration. He saw his own impatience. He closed his eyes. He took a breath. He let it out. He was doing it wrong. "Here," he said, his voice softer. He stood up. He went to her. He did not take the axe. He stood beside her. "Let me show you. Feel the balance of it." He used his good arm to guide hers. "Let the weight of the axe do the work. Do not fight it. Just Auto Pro 2 guide it." They worked like that, together. He was the mind. She and Matthew were the muscle. He taught them. He taught Matthew to hammer a peg, his small, serious face a study in concentration. He taught Sarah how to use the long crosscut saw, him on one end, pushing with his good arm, her on the other, pulling. It was not a house they built. It was a family. It took them 2 months. It was not the solid, heavy log cabin he had built for Mary. It was smaller, rougher. But when they put the roof on, a roof of split cedar shakes that smelled like heaven, they stood back and looked at it, all 4 of them. "It is Auto Pro 2, a house," Matthew breathed, his voice full of awe. "It is a home, son." Sam said. He put his good arm around Sarah's waist. She leaned into him. He felt the solid, warm reality of her. That night, they ate at a real table, one Sam had built from the leftover planks. The children slept in a small loft he had made for them. Sam and Sarah sat on the new porch. He had insisted on the porch. It faced the river. The air was cool, the sky brilliant with stars. Sarah was in a new rocking chair. He had traded his army pistol, the one he had used in the canyon, to the blacksmith in town for it. It was a trade he had made with a glad heart. He sat on the step, leaning his back against the post. His shoulder, though healed, was a mass of scarred, tight tissue. It ached every morning, and when the rains came, it was his reminder. "It is quiet," Sarah said, her voice soft in the darkness. "Yes," he said. They had been here for almost a year of peace, a year of hard, healing work. Sam's arm was useful again, though not as strong. He had cleared a field. He had planted corn and beans. He had built a small, tight barn for the mules and a new horse, a steady mare he had bought. But the past was not a dead thing. It was a shadow. Sarah woke up some nights, her breath catching in her throat, her hands clenched. She did not speak, but Sam knew where she was. She was back in the wagon, the shotgun in her hands, the roar of it in her ears. He would turn, his body shielding her from the memory. He would hold her, his hand stroking her hair. "It is all right," he would whisper. "We are here. It is just the wind." He would hold her until her breathing slowed, until her body softened against his. He was no longer just her protector. He was her comfort. And Sam Auto Pro too, he did not dream of Mary and Tom anymore. His grief had been buried, respectfully, under the new life he had built. But he dreamed of Wallace. He dreamed of the fight. He saw the faces of the men he had killed. He would wake, his heart hammering, his good hand reaching for a rifle that was no longer beside his bed. It was on the mantel, unloaded. He looked at Sarah, her profile soft in the starlight. "I saw a new man in town today," he said, his voice casual. Her rocking stopped. "Oh." He came in on the stage from Portland, asking questions about Auto Pro 2 land, but he had the look of a man who Auto Pro 2 who was looking for something else. She said nothing. She just waited. "He Auto Pro 2, he looked right at me," Sam said. "I was loading sacks at the mercantile. He just Auto Pro 2 stared. For a long time." Sarah's hand gripped the arm of the rocker. "What Auto Pro 2? What did he do?" Sam turned, looking up at her. He reached out and took her hand. "He asked me where he could find the best timber. He was a land agent. He did not see a ghost from Wyoming. He just saw Auto Pro 2 a farmer." She let out a breath she had been holding for a year. "Oh, Sam." He smiled, a slow, real smile. "He is gone. Sarah, Wallace, he is gone. He is a bad memory. He is 1,000 miles away. He cannot touch us here. We are not those people anymore." "Who are we?" she asked, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with relief. Sam Harlan stood up. He walked over to her, his movements no longer stiff with grief, but easy. He was a man who belonged to this land, to this house. He bent down and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and wood smoke and promise. "We are home," he said. He heard a sound from the loft. "Pa!" Matthew's sleepy voice called down. Sam's heart, the heart he had thought was a dead stone in his chest, felt so full he thought it might break. He had lost a son. He had gained one. He had lost a wife. He had found his life. "It is all right, Matthew," Sam called, his voice strong and clear, ringing out in the peaceful night. "Go back to sleep. I am here." He looked at Sarah. Her eyes were shining. The future was not a map. It was not a guarantee. It would be hard. There would be winters. There would be sickness. There would be droughts. But it did not matter. He took her hand again. They would face it. The hard, strong cowboy had learned that the greatest strength was not in his fist or his rifle. It was in the hand he held. It was in the family he had built from the scraps of 2 broken lives. It was love. It was justice. It was, finally, home. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night, like the video, and support further by pressing the hype button so this story in the video can be heard by more people.